Thank you everyone who is joining us today. My name is Kelly Levicker. I'm the Beyond Plastics Advocate with PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group. PIRG is an advocate for the public interest. We speak out for the public and stand up to special interest on problems that affect the public's health, safety, and well-being. We are very excited to be co-hosting today's event, Protecting Our Waters from Plastic Pellet Pollution, along with Environment America and Environmental Action. For today's event, we are going to discuss the impact plastic pellets, sometimes called nurdles, are having on the environment. We'll be hearing from some amazing people who are standing up to plastic facilities that are dumping pellets into local waterways, and about a national solution called the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. We have 6 exceptional speakers, and hopefully everyone will find this session both informative and inspiring. If we have time at the end, we will take questions. So if you have any, please put them in the Q&A feature and we will try to address them. We will also try to address any questions on an ongoing basis. So let's see how that goes. But before we begin, I would like to give a brief background on what plastic pellets are. So plastic is ubiquitous in our lives and almost impossible to avoid. Nurdles hold an important role within the plastic supply chain, as this form of plastic is the backbone of the plastic manufacturing industry, despite it being part of the chain we rarely see. It is the first recognizable plastic product after its conversion from gas or crude oil. These pellets are then sent to companies that manufacture plastic products, everything from single-use plastics like forks, takeaway containers, and grocery bags to durable plastic products such as toothbrushes, Legos, and car bumpers. Nurdles are small, generally the size of lentils. Their small size and lightweight allows the plastic supply chain to span the globe, since they are cheap to manufacture and transport. These qualities are also what leads them to be spilled into the environment so easily, like the image you see on your screen now. This image is from Sri Lanka, from the biggest marine plastic spill in history, including a lot of nurdles. Nurdles are spilled or dumped at every stage within the plastic supply chain. They are spilled from the factories that manufacture them during transportation, at distribution and export facilities, as well as into the oceans while they are being shipped around the world. Plastic pellets are estimated to be the second most common type of primary microplastic in the ocean by weight. By primary microplastic, we mean a plastic intentionally manufactured to be tiny, not broken down pieces of larger objects like plastic bottles that have been broken up, which we would consider to be secondary microplastics. Once in the environment, it's far too easy for a bird, fish, or turtle to mistake nurdles for food. As you can see here, if they resemble each other quite a lot. And if they eat enough plastic, they can starve to death. Nurdles can absorb toxic chemicals, including DDT, PCBs, and mercury. These types of pollutants bioaccumulate, meaning they become more concentrated and more toxic as they move up the food chain. As we'll see from today's presentations, these pellets may be tiny, but they are causing big environmental problems. We need a holistic preventative solution. With that, I'd like to hand it over to my colleague, Lisa Frank. She is the Executive Director of Environment America and the Vice President of the DC Director for the Public Interest Network. She will be introducing a special guest. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you so much, Kelly. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Congressman Mike Levin, lead sponsor of the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. Congressman Levin represents California's 49th Congressional District, which includes North County, San Diego, and South Orange County. And prior to being elected to the Congress in 2018, Mike Levin was an environmental attorney. In Congress, he's used that expertise to play a key role in advancing legislation to expand clean energy and protect our coast from offshore drilling. Congressman Levin, on behalf of all of us here today in Environment America and Environment California, thank you so much for joining us. And I'll give you the floor now to tell us about your bill.
Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. It is great to be with you virtually. Thank you, Lisa. Great to see you as always. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you to Environment America, and thank you to the Public Interest Research Group for inviting me today to speak about a really important topic. I am the father of two young kids. They're 11 and 10 years old, and I look at all of this through the lens of my kids, and I think they know that it is so important to protect this planet for them and for their kids and grandkids, and I'll always make protecting the environment one of my top priorities in Congress. And it was that way before Congress. It'll be that way no matter what I'm doing in my life, I can tell you. It's just so critically important. And when I got to Congress in 2019, I was told by a lot of people who had been in this town for a long time that there's no way a significant climate bill would ever pass. Those of you who have been in this fight were probably told the same by the naysayers who were focused on the past rather than thinking about the future. And we kept working at it. We knew that persistence plus opportunity equaled success, that we had to really lay the foundation. And we did with the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis that I was honored to serve on. And then in 2022, our opportunity came with all of your help. We passed the largest climate investment in the history of any nation, the Inflation Reduction Act. Truly incredible. I'm so proud not only to have supported that legislation, but to have had quite a lot to do with a number of provisions. And here's the thing, though. I know that we really are just getting started. We've got to stay persistent. We've got to create the opportunity to pass even stronger climate and environmental legislation in the future. The other lens that I look at all these issues through is my district. I represent, I think, one of the most beautiful districts in the country, coastal Southern California in North San Diego County and South Orange County, about 50 miles of beautiful coastline, and also a really important rail corridor, actually the second busiest rail corridor in the United States that connects San Diego to the rest of California. And the challenge that we have is that our rail corridor in some places is literally falling into the ocean. So that's a whole nother issue. Sand is another very important topic, and stabilizing those bluffs. But the other thing that you need to be mindful of is that the transportation of goods along that corridor contributes to a very serious problem. And that's why we're here, specifically why we're here today. And that's plastic pellets and the impact they have on our health and our environment. Over the last several years, my constituents and I have noticed these tiny plastic pellets, no bigger than a sharp pencil point, showing up alongside the railroad tracks in our district. They spill off cargo trains as they travel through the district, and every time it rains, they wash off the tracks and into storm drains, lagoons, and ultimately into the Pacific Ocean. Once in the water, we know they attract and accumulate toxic chemicals and harmful bacteria that threaten our surrounding marine life. Unfortunately, birds, fish, other wildlife, they mistake these pellets for food. And when they eat these pellets, they ingest dangerous chemicals and bacteria. And the pellets can block the animals' digestive tracts, potentially even killing them, and in some cases, ending up in the food that we all eat. Recent studies have also shown that plastic pellets can be found in the air we breathe. So we're inhaling these toxic substances that can have a damaging impact on our bodies. In other words, what we're seeing and what we're falling victim to is a steady stream of toxic plastic pollution that degrades our marine environments, poses a health threat to humans and animals, and contributes to the global pollution crisis. The problem extends beyond coastal districts like mine. Because of their size, these pellets easily spill whenever and wherever they're transported. Furthermore, companies can discharge these pellets into waterways without any oversight and without any federal regulation. It's unacceptable, it's a catastrophe, and we've got to put a stop to it. Our kids deserve a world free from polluted water and from contaminated food. Unfortunately, the EPA does not have an established federal role to address plastic pellets, and most states don't have meaningful regulations to combat plastic pollution. And that's why I introduced my Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act with my dear friend from Alaska, Congresswoman Mary Peltola. I'm proud that this bill has 55 bipartisan co-sponsors. I'm incredibly grateful to organizations like yours for helping build that bipartisan support. So what would our bill do specifically? It would require EPA to issue a rule that prohibits the discharge of plastic pellets into our nation's waters. It would protect our beaches, wetlands, and waterways, but more importantly, it would help put an end to the ecological and health threats posed by plastic pellets. We've got to continue to garner support for this bill so we can take advantage of the next opportunity that arises to move it through the legislative process. I encourage you to be in touch with Amanda Schaefer, who does an incredible job on our team as our lead environmental and energy policy staffer. I'm so grateful to be in the fight with you. We've got to cut plastic pollution. We've got to protect our environment for continued generations. So I thank you for your continued support. Thank you for your advocacy for this issue and for so many other issues. You are tremendous. And Lisa, thank you personally for all you do. Back to you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Congressman Levin. We really appreciate it.
Take care, everybody.
Bye. Okay, we're now going to shift gears and hear about different actions people are taking to tackle nurdle pollution in their own communities, including, but not limited to, litigation. Our next speakers hail from Pennsylvania. Captain Evan Clark works with the Three Rivers Waterkeeper, and Eric Harder works for the Mountain Watershed Association. These two organizations work together closely. The Three Rivers Waterkeeper and Penn Environment have a pending lawsuit against BVPV Styrenics and its parent company, Styropec, for alleged violations of the Federal Clean Water Act. Captain Evan, Eric, welcome, and thank you for being here to tell us about your work.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. I'll just do a quick intro. My name's Eric Harder. I'm the Youghiogheny River Keeper, and I work for Mountain Watershed Association. Our area basically covers 1,700 square miles, and traditionally our issues with water quality extend from AMD issues associated with abandoned mines, recreational heavy use in the summertime, and a whole suite of other typical issues with water quality. But I appreciate being here and honored to be here. So I appreciate those nice words from Representative Levin. Like myself, I also have 2 children, and I also believe I live in one of the most beautiful areas of the United States. So I can appreciate everyone's sentiment there.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Kelly, especially, and everybody else who's put this webinar together, and all the participants, and of course, the audience for listening. My name is Captain Evan Clark. I work with Three Rivers Waterkeeper. I've been a waterkeeper here in the greater Pittsburgh area for the last around 3 years. Before that, I worked for another nonprofit called Allegheny Cleanways, and I, with the help of a lot of volunteers, picked about 1 million pounds of trash out of the rivers. And the overwhelming majority of that trash was plastics. This was like post-consumer plastics. So it was really interesting as soon as I started with Waterkeeper to get pulled into a project that Mountain Watershed had already started with this patrol around an up-and-coming plastics plant in our area, which is Shell's ethane cracker plant, or Shell Appalachia. And what they do down there is make polyethylene primarily out of fracked natural gas feedstock. So it's not just plastics, which are a great and an important tool in the materials we have to use in our society, but I think are a tool that really need to be used appropriately and used with the long term in mind, and that's clearly not happening. As Shell was getting ready to get started, they started construction in about 2016, and they were advertised as the largest potential capacity plastic producer in the US. About 1.6 million tons per annum was their plan. And they were also really thinking that they were going to be able to produce plastics significantly cheaper than other plastics on the market, which I mean, I think that that's probably the last thing we need is a lower upfront cost. They're massively subsidized, 1.65 billion by the state of Pennsylvania with tax exemptions and other tax breaks. And when they started operation in November of 22, right away they had massive air issues, $5 million fine, which was record setting from our DEP. Which was for blowing through a whole year's worth of air pollution in a single month. Another interesting thought I wanted to throw in the mix about Shell. There was something I'd heard early on as they were getting ready to set up their plant in town, about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh. Was that folks were thinking about Shell's plant up here as kind of a form of industrial climate migration with all the problems they're having along the Gulf Coast, having to shut down production so often. And if you want to read a little bit more about Shell and Pennsylvania, there's an ORV article that I thought was really informative called Pennsylvania's Bad Bet. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Eric again to talk a little bit about the work that they started, and I joined in with doing some pre-production patrolling with Shell.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, there's a good picture of us, actually. James there in the front of the picture in the Steelers hat. Would love to be here. He's been very dedicated and very passionate about the NERDA Patrol. The Heather's there, executive director of Three Rivers Waterkeeper, and Evan in the background, and myself there. And so we've been out every month for the past, I'd say, 4 years. It started in 2020, maybe a couple months where we had to skip or we missed, but every month we go out and we do what we have called our own NERDA Patrol. And so with that, just want to recognize the other nerdapatrol.org that is out there is basically where we got a lot of our protocol from, a lot of our ideas about how to map some of these issues. And you can see us in the picture there. There's the crew has already sampled one of our areas and are picking through the debris to look for these nurdles. And when it comes down to it, our basic thought was, how are we going to share this knowledge about plastics in our water? And for someone who lives in Southwest Pennsylvania, the fact that there is floating plastic debris in our waterways is concerning enough. However, now there is a manufacturer and basically a generator of these nurdles in our area. So is there plastic in our waterway? Is there nurdles? Is something that we had basically had to ask ourselves, and how are we going to find out? So we established a protocol of our own, where you see on the picture upstream and downstream locations of where we sampled, and those are upstream and downstream of the Shell cracker plant there on the center of the screen. So water is coming at us, and we felt that we needed to sample as close to Shell as possible so that we didn't get an influx of other tributaries or waterways that are coming in that could also skew our data, I guess, in one sense. So prior to construction, we set up these locations and sampled 5 locations upstream, 5 locations downstream. And we would sample basically by using a motorboat and trying to match the speed of the river, the Ohio River in this case, going in an upstream fashion. Basically, we're staying steady as we drag what you see in the photo here, our trowel through the water to sample a segment of the waterway. And now that metal opening is only 1 foot wide. So if you add up all of our sampling, it's only 5 feet of river that we're actually sampling in the entire transect of the Ohio there. So it's a very, very small window and just a very small snapshot of actually what's happening in the waterway. And yet our first time out, we were surprised that we actually found a nurdle. So not only would we set up a transect and go 5 different locations across to sample across the river what was actually floating downstream. But we would also get out on the ground and look around, basically performing the same protocol that was established by the nurdlepatrol.org, so that we can keep some sort of recognizable protocol, which was deemed pretty accurate in the past about counting and finding hotspots. This next picture is basically an upstream photo of the facilities near Shell, and I think that's another part of what a benefit of this project was, is it got us on the water so often that we were able to identify other streams that were culprits that would carry these products downstream. And this facility specifically came into play. And go ahead, Evan, I'll let you follow up on what happens at Styropec.
Yeah. So I think it's also important to point out in those years, year plus of sampling around the area before Shell started operations, we were consistently seeing plastics in the water and consistently seeing plastics on the shoreline, all from pretty varied origins, lots of different colors, shapes, degrees of weathering. So we knew right away we had a plastics problem. And even before Shell started operation. The other thing that we stumbled upon literally almost was this Styropec facility had just changed ownership from Nova Chemicals when we started patrolling. And it turns out it was that facility is the largest expanded polystyrene producer in North America. And you see in the picture on the right, very tiny little beads of polystyrene basically unpopped, coating leaves of plants, and that was our first clue that something was going on. We started dragging our trawl through, and it's very hard to see in there, but there's tons of tiny little plastics, smaller than a poppy seed, peppering that sample that we had pulled out of their trawl, and right in the middle of it, there's a tiny fish. We would see these fish which is very common for us to see around any outfall, but fish schooling, big pods, a lot of bait fish, and a lot of people fishing those outfalls as well. So it was pretty concerning. We went directly to our PA Department of Environmental Protection, EPA, PA Fish and Boat, and reported these as an issue. And I thought of it as a pretty simple NIFTY's permit, Clean Water Act permit issue, where we were looking at floating solids and or trash coming out of these facilities. And so it seemed clear to us that that there should be some enforcement taking place. After we watched, a vast amount of these plastics come out of Styropec for over a year, we finally threw our hands up in the air and with the assistance of a legal team, I'm sorry, here, gave a notice that we were going to sue. And the settlement, which we're hopeful for, is still pending. I can't really talk a lot about that since there's a lot of negotiation going on, but we're asking for them to work on remediation projects around the site, because the ground around there it's just deeply covered in plastics, as well as the stream. Expenses, of course. And zero discharge out of their plant in the future, and then of course fines, which would be enforceable by our DEP, who has joined us in the lawsuit. And we're really excited to be amongst this kind of, I guess, select group of folks who doing this precedent-setting work, hopefully, and getting enforcement done on these plastics violators.
One thing to add is I think what Representative Levin was really pointing at is there is no set standard for nurdles or plastic pellet pollution. And for Pennsylvania, I don't feel that the DEP will be establishing any standard until after the EPA does. They have assumed the responsibility of the Clean Water Act, so they will basically wait for the EPA to make some standard and then either copy that or slightly change that. So I think the purpose of the act, I think, is to address those issues.
I think two things I want to cover real quick before we pass it on is that those last two slides were an Operation Clean Sweep picture. It's a voluntary association amongst plastic producers where they pledge not to lose plastics on the ground. And I also have a short video of panning down from that sticker down to the open valve and then down to the nurdles, which you can kind of see in the background in there as well. It was that was a rough day seeing all of that. I'm assuming that we're probably running over now and you want to move on? Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think it's really important people hear your story because so often nurdles are perceived as a coastal problem, and you are showing that it's not. Industrial climate migration is a really interesting term. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. We're now going to move south from Pennsylvania down to South Carolina. Our next speaker is Catherine Wanamaker. Catherine came face to face with nurdles from a different perspective, a legal perspective. She represented the Charleston Waterkeeper and the Coastal Conservation League in a lawsuit against Frontier Logistics, which is a company that exports nurdles. Catherine, welcome.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. We can go to my first slide, maybe. Yeah, so I am a senior attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center in Charleston, South Carolina. Next slide, please. For those that don't know anything about SELC, we've been around for a long time now. We were started in 1986 as a law firm, essentially, for nonprofit environmental work in the South. Designed to kind of uniquely protect the resources of the South and using, the power of the law to do so. Next slide, please. We have kind of grown in massive amounts over the last several decades to 100 lawyers now with 9 offices in 6 states in the South. What I want to talk about briefly today is the work that we started. Next slide. In 2020 in Charleston, South Carolina. This is a picture of the Charleston Waterkeeper. Some of you may know Andrew Wonderly, combing through marsh rack on beaches in just outside of Charleston, where all of a sudden a huge number of these tiny plastic pellets washed up just out of the blue. No one was really looking for them, and people started walking their dogs on the beaches and saying, like, what are all these tiny little plastic balls? And so at that point, the state administrative agency was called and they came to look at it, but they basically, did nothing much about this. In Charleston at that time, there was a facility. This is an example, and it's something that I think is common in a lot of port towns. So worth, paying attention to if you are in a city with lots of shipping. There was a facility called Frontier Logistics. Their business basically is to receive nurdles on rail cars. The nurdles are manufactured in Texas, sent on rail cars all the way across the country to this warehouse here located literally, oh, I'm sorry, next slide, please. Literally located over the water, sitting on the water in downtown Charleston. So the nurdles come in by train, come into this warehouse, and then they are packaged in these bulk containers that you can see in this picture, the white bags, for export overseas, to be melted into lots of, plastic bottles and toys and those kinds of things. The problem, of course, is that, the location of this facility, I mean, you've heard everyone on this call, I think, say like nurdles spill from every kind of at every mode in the transport and packing process, they end up on the ground. And so that's why we have them coming off of rail cars. The problem here, of course, is the facility was sitting over the water. So anytime a nurdle spilled onto the ground, it ended up being blown by wind or just getting through cracks in the pier here, and all of them ended up in water. And anytime it rained, a very large amount, which is common in Charleston in the summertime, huge numbers of nurdles washed off of this facility. When we first started working on this, we thought like, well, great, maybe the state will take care of this problem and we won't have to litigate about it. There was no permit for this facility under the Clean Water Act that covered the discharge of nurdles. The state of South Carolina really did nothing, as I mentioned earlier, because there was no permit to enforce, and I'm not sure they would have even if there had been a permit. And so at that point, we undertook a monitoring effort. We sent a notice of our intent to sue, and we undertook a monitoring effort for 25 weeks with the waterkeeper out sampling every week. We brought in nodal patrol folks from Texas to kind of help us assess how bad the problem was. And you can see, next slide, please. We found that, this was one of the most significant pollution problems anywhere on the East Coast, which was like shocking to us when this was discovered, because there was no manufacturing facility in Charleston. We were just talking about this export facility. Next slide, please. So at that point, we decided, this is a really important issue. These are the types of things that SELC likes to take on from a legal perspective, where the state will not enforce, where we have the ability to make new precedent on an important kind of emerging issue, and where it's just a big environmental problem in our region. So we filed a case, essentially. I think it was the second case in the country. There was the Formosa case from Texas that had gone before us over a manufacturing facility. And then our case was the second case in the country filed, and we basically argued that this was a violation of 2 federal environmental laws, not just one. We argued that nurdles were a pollutant under the federal Clean Water Act because they were a pollutant being discharged. I won't get too deep into the legal weeds, but from a point source at this facility, the pier. And then we also argued what at the time we thought was a novel claim, but I think was maybe our more important one ultimately, under the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, RCRA, that nurdles were a solid waste that present an imminent and substantial endangerment to the environment because of all the risk you heard about to turtles and fish and humans ultimately. And so off we went to litigation. It was a pretty hard fought case. We got about a year into the case, and next slide, please. We had, the world's leading kind of microplastics expert from Canada on our team, and she submitted an expert report on this imminent and substantial endangerment issue about how bad these pellets were for the environment. And then we got a call from the other side saying, do you all want to talk about a settlement of this litigation? And so, long story short, we ended up settling our lawsuit for approximately $1 million in restoration and remediation money for Charleston. We got all of our attorney's fees. And maybe the most important piece that I think is an important, kind of part of this nurdle puzzle, assuming that we can't stop them entirely, we got the facility relocated from the water in Charleston to much further inland and designed in a way such that no nurdle ever hits the ground. And we've been able to do inspections of that facility since the settlement and make sure that's actually the case. So those are kind of my big picture points, Kelly. I just think, this is super interesting work. And from the lawyer's perspective, I expect to see more of this litigation. I think it may take more of this litigation to bolster, some of the congressional efforts and to really tighten down regulation of this industry, which has basically had kind of a free pass from Clean Water Act regulation historically.
For sure. Thank you so much, Catherine. I really appreciate that. One thing that I find so interesting in your case is the links that it has with a global plastic supply chain that shows that our problem here is extending across the globe. So I find that
Yes.
interesting.
Yes. And I mean, an interesting point just related to that I'll mention very briefly is that, we sued the company that was had this warehouse on the water in Charleston, Frontier Logistics. But one of the main parties in our case ended up being the Port of Charleston. They intervened in our case to side with the plastic exporter because this is such big business for the town of Charleston that they want more and more plastic exporters coming to Charleston and other ports in the Southeast. And so we really had to battle not just Frontier, but the whole kind of Ports Authority apparatus from the state of South Carolina. So it's big, it's big business at a lot of the ports.
For sure. And there was an article recently that showed that 3 East Coast ports have increased their nurdle exports in the past year. So this is an increasing problem that we should pay attention to. So thank you
For
so much
sure.
for your presentation and your work. We greatly appreciate it. Okay, so we're now going to move over to Texas. So our next speaker is Diane Wilson. She's a 4th generation shrimper. She is the recipient of the 2023 Goldman Environmental Prize for North America, which is a prize for grassroots leaders. It's also sometimes referred to as the Green Nobel Prize. And she got this prize for her work on plastic pellets. She currently works for the San Antonio Bay Estuarine Waterkeeper. She also was a plaintiff in a landmark case against Formosa Plastics. She will be discussing a bit more about that case, as well as the ongoing remediation efforts around the Formosa plant. Diane, you are most welcome.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Okay. Shall we have the first page on? Okay, there it is. It's pretty much my story is about the plastic in Lavaca, Matagorda Bay, and all the waterways connected with it. I'm a 4th generation fisherwoman from the mid-Texas Gulf Coast. We live right on the water, and we are surrounded by chemical plants. Formosa Plastics is one of those, and it began an expansion in 1989. It was the largest plastic expansion in Texas history. And they made plastic. They previously had made PVC powder, and then they started making polyethylene, polypropylene, pellets, and powder. And I know there is a lot of the words use nurdles, but I have been working with the workers from the plants, and they all call them pellets. So excuse me if I keep saying pellets and the powder, which is the resin. And what you see in front of you during our preview before the lawsuit and after, I've probably taken over 20,000 photographs. Some of the photos in front of you are the pellets and the powder and the mixture of powder and pellets in the bays in Texas and the waterways. And on the right is was a probably that area was like 300 foot long, and it was like 8 foot wide, and it was at Formosa's stormwater outfalls. I know a lot of people are thinking of distribution and transportation, and what we found is it was the pellets coming out of the facility, and it was a 2,500 acre facility, and they had 10 stormwater discharges, and they had a 9 million gallon per day discharge in the middle of Matagorda Bay. And what you see below is, you may not have seen that, but that's powder floating on the water in the bay. Next. So not only do we have these chemical plants surrounding in Formosa Plastics, which has this huge discharge into the bays, but we are historically fishing communities. We have Vietnamese, we have Hispanic, oystermen, shrimpers, trout liners, fin fishermen, and we also have sports fishermen who love to come down to the Gulf. And these are the people that are plying their trade right in the middle of all of this mess. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Formosa's in the background. Like I said, it's 2,500 acres, probably 3,000 workers. There is the outfall on the left, which is underwater, 9 million gallons per day, and it discharges their industrial waste stream, including pellets and the powder. And when I'm talking about the powder, it's like microplastic. It's very tiny particles of plastic, but it's powder. And on the right is the back end of Formosa, where they have they have exactly 10 stormwater outfalls. In the stormwater outfalls, some of them are big enough that you can land a plane on them. And they have sometimes have a tremendous outfall that is like a river. And sometimes, and we found this in discovery when we sued Formosa, is that sometimes in those outfalls, which Formosa had been doing for 26 years, there was a discharge of pellets, 170,000 pounds in one day of pellets. And there are 22,000 pellets per pound. So you can figure there were billions of pellets that were released in one outfall in one day. And like I said, they got 10 and they've been doing it for 26 years. Next. What you have there is a picture of Calhoun County. There's a couple of little towns, and then you've got Lavaca, Matagorda Bay. And those little colored places are the places we started sampling. When I say we, I'm talking about a handful of us, and predominantly they were workers in the plant, because right off the bat, I've been fighting Formosa for 35 years, but it was the workers in the plants who started coming to me, specifically Formosa's, because it was a really unsafe plant and there was a lot of pollution and there was no security for their jobs. There was no help from any of the state and federal agencies, not from OSHA, not from elected officials, because the elected officials in our communities were getting contracts with Formosa. So these guys eventually came to what should have been the worst of the enemy of the plastic company. It was the local environmentalists, and they started coming to me. And so I worked with the injured workers, the exposed workers. And when we started collecting evidence, and we collected evidence because Formosa had never filed a violation, and the state environmental agency, TCEQ, had never gave them a violation. I mean, they've been doing it for 26 years, but there wasn't a single violation on the record. So about three of us, less than a handful, we went every single day for almost 3 years out into the bay, out into the marshes. I got a kayak and found out all of Formosa's stormwater outfalls. And that's how we collected the evidence, 2,500 samples. Next. And you wonder about where are all of these pellets coming from? And I know a lot of people say industry, you know, they won't give out information on how much plastic they're losing. And the thing of it is you can tell right off the bat if a company knows how much they're losing. They will definitely know how much they're producing, but a lot of times they have not a clue about how much they are losing, because you can tell is, have they did a audit? Have they did a self audit? And generally the answer is no. But when we started suing Formosa and started collecting pellet samples all over the bay and then their outfalls, Formosa was like, okay, guys, we gotta find out where we're losing all these pellets. So they, you know, and I got these documents from our discovery. It's like, there were the places where they were losing pellets. It was in the units, it was in the shipping, it was in the upsets. You see that little picture right there on the bottom left? That was an upset. And it was in the SPVC unit, is a specialized PVC, and it was 5 stories high. And I got that photograph from the shift supervisor because he became so alarmed, and he said it was happening every week. It was going up 5 stories open to the environment, and they didn't report it. And so that's why I got that photograph. Next. Here again was that SPVC unit, and he was a whistleblower, and he tried to tell his supervisors, but they fired him. And so he gave me all of the photographs. And if you're a supervisor, you can take photographs because you're supposed to be looking for problems. And what you'll see is on the bottom left, again, that was after a upset, and that was from a process upset. And so they lost all of this powder, and you can see that top bottom, I mean, on the left, on the bottom, that is the 5th floor. And if you look out, you can see it's like you're up on this high tower, but it's a SPVC unit, and the powder went up 5 stories, and it was like almost 6 inches deep. And then on the top left, you can see that's what it looked like in the units where the guys were walking around. They were slushing around in this. And then on the right, this was during an upset, and they had their largest vacuum truck out there trying to vacuum all of this vinyl chloride, PVC slurry. And the truck had so much on the 3rd trip, it blew a tire because it was wiped out. And also on that bottom right is something very interesting that I don't know if many people know, because it's not just the pellets and the powder. These are part of what are in the reactors, that bottom right. And that stuff gets pulled out. Sometimes they have to use jackhammers to do it. It gets washed out, and a lot of it goes straight to the stormwater outfalls or straight to the bay. And as that shift supervisor told me, he said in these units, you not only get powder, you get pellets, you get rocks, you get boulders, and you get Volkswagens. Sometimes what you get out of them, these plastic, over-spec pieces of plastic, they're the size of Volkswagens. Next. Again, this is pellets in the stormwater outfalls. It goes straight to the creek. And here is the train next. That's a train, and that's probably 100, probably over 1,000 pounds of pellets right there. Next, this is the PVC powder pellets, and it's on the creeks, it's on the banks, it's everywhere. This is the powder that is on the vegetation. It's covering the vegetation. Next, this is one of our typical samples of pellets, and we were using pool nets to get it up. And also here are the pellets that were embedded in the roots of floating vegetation. To clean up all of this, they had to kill every piece of vegetation out there to try to reach those pellets. Next. And again, this is the powder on Caucasus Creek, probably from the SPVC unit. Next. When Formosa saw that we were finding all of these pellets, they put up barbed wire fences to keep us out, as you can see, and they started bringing workers down there, and they would blast like you were a fireman out there, and they did such damage. They uprooted all of the soil, and there was nothing left but bare roots on the top. And that was their effort to try to camouflage some of the pellets. Next. Again, here they are, some of the cleanup crew on Outfall 6, one of the stormwater outfalls. Next. This is where they were, like I said, they had boats up and down. They were trying to get some of these pellets. And I think eventually we figured through our cleanup and their pellet accumulation, I think maybe there were, what was it, like 64 billion pellets. Anyway, next. Oh yeah, and this is what it looks like. That's the creek over on the left, and the right was after the crew came in with a hydroblasters and trying to blast the pellets. And they are, like the previous person said, they were embedded. When we finally brought in excavation teams to clean it up, to do it the right way, they were digging down to 3 feet to remove the pellets. Next. And this was my workers. They were workers at the plant. The top left is they're at Outfall 9. And the white-haired guy was the shift supervisor for the PVC unit. And this was the evidence. It was in my yard. I kept it in my barn. And this what 2,500 samples looks like. And we put it on a goat, a trailer, and hauled it to court. And we won. We won $50 million settlement, zero discharge of plastic. We got enforcement. We got monitoring. We got cleanup. And we got to go inside the plant in the engineering to find the places where they were losing all these plastic. And believe it or not, the engineers found I think there's 480 projects to the tune of $1 billion. Anyway, that's it, folks.
Thank you so much, Diane. We really appreciate that. You know, the one problem is that we kind of need like a whole webinar because you've had so many years of experience with this issue. You're a fountain of knowledge.
Thank you.
So that's a problem. And we're trying to like contain you in a very short segment. We apologize.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. We really appreciate that. We're now going to return and briefly hear from Lisa Frank. This time she will be discussing what Environment America has done to campaign for the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. And then I will briefly discuss other things you can do. And I think unfortunately we're not going to have much time for a Q&A.
Thank you. And let's do a quick, I saw the claps floating through. Thank you to Diane, to Captain Clark, to everyone who is joining us today and who has been working really hard to tackle this problem. We don't think companies should be allowed to dump or spill plastic into our waterways, period, even though it's happening all over the country. And that's why we're working to pass the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. So let's go to the next slide. I think this bill is a really common sense solution. It just says that companies can't keep discharging plastic into our waterways. But few people around this country are familiar with the problems of plastic pellets. And so that means Congress isn't taking action. So we've been working to build a powerful coalition of water protectors, concerned citizens, people like you all, to educate more of the public and convince Congress to act before more pellets get into the ocean. In April, Environment America and our state offices teamed up with PERG and Earth Day Network for a lobby day to earn more support for this legislation. We took jars of nurdles to our members of Congress and showed them how big a problem this is. We've also, next slide, been organizing nurdle counts, like you heard from many of our speakers on the webinar today, to find out where these plastic pellets are a problem and raise more awareness. Right now, here's where we stand. There are more than 70 senators and representatives who have endorsed this legislation. That is a great start, but there are 535 members of Congress. So we are going to need more support to pass the bill this year. And a couple things we're doing to get there. Let's go to the next slide. First, PIRG is launching a grassroots campaign in cities across the country this summer, where canvassers will knock on doors, educate people about the threat posed by plastic pellets, and get thousands of people to urge their representative to support the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. If you are looking for a job this summer and can help with that effort, I'm sure Kelly would love to be in touch with you and we can get you signed up. Secondly, we know the reason PIRG is doing that is we know that when lawmakers hear directly from their constituents, like you all, that makes a big difference in whether or not they take action to solve this problem. So everyone here will take a minute to add your voice right now and tell your representative to support the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act using this QR code on the screen. I'm also going to paste the link in the chat. Oh, yes. Thank you, Camille. This is a quick and easy way for you to let your lawmaker know that you care and, won't stand for more pellets getting into our waterways. Lastly, I want to say, I know we have some congressional staff joining us today. You can make a big difference too. Get your boss to co-sponsor the bill. We'd be happy to follow up with you on any questions that you might have, and I hope that you'll support. Thank you all for taking action. It'll really make a difference with our lawmakers, and I want to pass it back to Kelly to wrap things up today.
Well, thank you so much. For this last segment, I'm going to try to be as brief as I possibly can, but I want to talk about the worth of a nurdle in monetary terms is virtually zero. It only has monetary worth when in mass quantities. And while a company sees a pellet lost as nothing to its bottom line, the effect of these pellets accumulating within our environment, affecting our own health and that of our families and feathered friends, turtles and fish, does have worth. It is unacceptable that companies litter our environment with real life health and environmental consequences. So we need to pass the Plastic Pellet Free Waters Act. And while the plastic industry may seem like a Goliath industry too powerful to tackle, our speakers today have proven it's possible. So look in ways in your own life that you can help contribute to this, to reduce the problem. One thing I'd like to really encourage you to do is to go out on a nurdle hunt. And what we have seen today is we've seen that eyes on the ground are the first step in holding companies accountable. If we go to the next slide, this image was taken from the website of Nurdle Patrol, which is a citizen science project. It shows all the places that people have looked for nurdles and in what amount they were found. Purple dots show the areas with the highest quantity, followed by red, orange, yellow, and green shows where there were 0 nurdles. So doing nurdle hunts helps create a broader understanding of the extent and depth of nurdle pollution. It also helps raise awareness, as when you're out looking for nurdles, people are going to ask, what are you doing? And this is an opportunity to spread awareness. It also helps identify where companies are polluting and where there are trouble spots. So we will drop a link into the chat. That's a guide to, sorry, excuse me, to how to do a nurdle hunt. But I'd also really encourage you to report your data to Nurdle Patrol and FIDRA. And if you find a lot of pellets somewhere, please let us know. We at PIRG, inside the guide that we have a link to how you can let us know. And I think with that, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really great to see so many people interested in the issue of plastic pollution and specifically plastic pellets. I really want to thank all our speakers today. I think they have done wonderful work on their work against plastic pellet pollution. And thank you so much for giving us your time today. So with that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.